As a wealth manager, inflation plays a key role in how Money Farm operates. It's a large part of the reasons our clients invest in the first place, with inflation beating returns being the name of the game over the long term. In the UK, inflation is currently the highest it's been in a generation. But what's causing the spike in prices? Well, in this video, we'll take a look at inflation over time and examine the causes for rising prices. We'll also explain how it affects other parts of the global and the local economy. Before we dive into the causes, let's explain exactly what we mean by inflation. Put simply, inflation is the general increase in the price of goods and services over time. So, £10 in 1980 would have bought you far more than it does today. In fact, £10 in 1980 was worth the equivalent of £34.65 in 2021. This means that, over time, each individual pound is worth less than it was in the past. Generally, the Bank of England aims for a rate of inflation akin to about 2% a year. This is manageable increases in prices, with wages able to keep up and avoiding any big shocks to family budgets. For a number of reasons, however, this isn't always achievable. In the UK in the 1970s, we famously saw spiralling inflation caused primarily by a tripling of fuel prices and rapidly rising wages. From the early 1990s to 2020, inflation didn't top 5%. Despite slight raises in the aftermath of the 2008 financial crash. Now, there are 5 primary inflationary drivers. When spikes in inflation occur, it's often a result of one or more of these factors pushing up prices. Here's a quick breakdown. First, demand pull inflation is what happens when demand outpaces supply. Economists will often describe this as too many dollars chasing too few goods. The key factors that can cause demand pull inflation are higher wages, increased consumer confidence, and rising house prices. Cost push inflation is when prices rise as a result of increases in the business's running costs. For example, a spike in oil prices can affect businesses' bottom lines, a cost which is then passed on to the consumer. Devaluation is a bit trickier to explain. This is the process of officially lowering the value of a currency relative to foreign reference currencies or a currency basket. What this means in practice is that the deliberate diminishing in value of the pound or dollar, for example. A weaker currency means that imports become more expensive, but exports become more competitive. This can lead to an increase in exports, which can benefit an economy long term. However, with imports becoming more expensive and aggregate demand going up, this leads to inflation, even if GDP is rising. Another key trigger for inflation is rising wages. Ultimately, when wages rise quickly, businesses have higher operating costs and again pass this cost on to the consumer. It has the added effect of putting more money in the pockets of consumers, meaning that prices can be increased. This played a key role in the extremely high inflation seen in the 1970s. The final key trigger can occur as a result of other forms of inflation or as a result of speculation. When consumers expect prices to rise, having seen stories in the news for example, they are likely to demand wage rises, which leads to further inflation as firms put up prices to counter the extra operating expenses. When inflation begins to rise or threatens to get out of control, it is generally the job of the central banks to put measures in place to counter it. The implementation of these measures is known as tightening monetary policy or hawkish policies like higher interest rates. Higher interest rates makes it more expensive to borrow, which reduces both investment and consumption thanks to the reliance on credit in both activities. This is one of the key tools in the arsenal of the central banks when it comes to lowering inflation. Equally, when a central bank wants to stimulate the economy, they don't tend to simply print money and throw it into circulation. This is where bonds come in. Instead, they buy government or corporate bonds to increase the amount of cash in the system, which causes inflation. On the other hand, when they want to reduce the amount of money in the system and slow inflation down, they sell bonds. Periods of high inflation do come to an end. This is normally thanks to a combination of factors that slow price growth. These are things like reduced government spending, higher interest rates, and a consumer desire to save rather than to spend. Generally, governments reducing the money supply within an economy is the most common way inflation is brought down. In extreme cases, the economy can enter a period of deflation, the opposite of inflation. Now, deflation is where price growth reverses and they fall. The most recent example was seen between 2007 and 2008 during the Great Recession of the period. If you have capital held in cash, it's important to carefully consider what the effects of the current level of inflation would be on your purchasing power. This might be difficult to grasp, especially for the younger generations that haven't seen this level of inflation in their lifetime. Inflation this high can seriously hamper your ability to reach your financial goals like buying a house or saving for retirement. Just 25 years ago, the average price of a house in London was just about £100,000. Today, it's more than 5 times that amount. This is why it's important to protect your capital. Our team is here to help you assess your strategy and to avoid paying the price in the future. Thank you.